Hey, I'm so excited to be introducing Kristen Nieto, aka Intellectual Purpose, the channel. Kristen works in marketing and communication and is a poet looking for avenues to improve her writing and advance her position as an emerging literary presence. Kristen, hey, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's awesome. Thanks for dropping in.
Yeah.
It's been so great to read your portfolio, and I feel like your poems offer this. You're often kind of channeling um, a big change of pace from a lot of the stuff I usually cover in the channel. You're more in a satirical idiom, and you seem really interested in kind of tackling kind of received ideas around religion, family, treatment of women in society. I think these to me are things where I feel like um, there's kind of a fairly strong attack you want to go in. It just, uh, I want to help you focus on perhaps some of the most productive strategies for executing that attack.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I go in, I start writing, and I know what I want to say. I have the feeling, but I always hit a wall. It's kind of like and I notice people notice it in my poetry. Like you've read a few of my works in other videos, and you've never read it all the way through. And the places where you stop, I'm like, okay, he found the wall. That's where I just hit a wall and I lost sight of what I was saying, or I lost control. I guess it happens in a lot of my work.
Well, I mean, rereading your stuff again and kind of looking over a little bit more breadth of your production, I do think actually you do have an admirable level of focus. So you're often prosecuting fairly similar themes. And if we're talking about trying to develop a portfolio of stuff that you're trying to send out and publish, it's nice to be kind of honed in on similar things, right? So oftentimes I'll look at a portfolio I've sent out, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like my 5 poems are totally all over the map. Well, I think
Yeah.
there's really a lot of cohesion here to build on.
Awesome.
So I think that's going to be good. Do you have any poets in particular you would think like, hey, when I'm reading this, I'm like, wow, I wish I could do it like that. Is there a particular poem or poet, probably poet, who you think does kind of maybe not exact? I know your style is going to be all your own, but like maybe you're like, oh man, I kind of wish I would have written that one. You know?
Oh, Sylvia Plath for sure. Everything I read of hers,
So
I
that
just like she's a master.
I
And
agree with you, Kristen, but Sylvia Plath's project doesn't have that much in common with you because while satire probably factors somewhat into it, I think a lot of her tools are turned inward into
mhm,
herself a little bit.
yeah.
She's certainly dissatisfied with the station of women in society, but there's this kind of inwardness to her poetry. Well, I think you're much more of a kind of a kind of diagnosis. You're trying to diagnose a problem and pull things apart. Um,
Hmm.
so
I'm trying to remember the name of the collection is. I take in poetry from pretty much everywhere, and I have a horrible retention memory.
mhm.
So like I have these poems in my head, but I don't always remember the name of the poet. I did come across this collection that was written in like the 90s, and it was called like Somebody Lost the Password or something like that.
Okay.
And the guy's name, he was like John something who wrote them. I'm ashamed to say I can't remember his last name.
Well, we can reconnect on that and find some opportunities for follow up. But in terms of the kind of effective, sharp, incisive social critique, I think the kind of American master of the form, um, and he has a big range. He does a lot of different stuff. Um, probably would be Langston Hughes. If you want to look at a guy who's like, well, this just ain't right about our society, and I'm going to
Mhm.
diagnose it and focus my energy outward, Now,
Mm-hmm.
Langston Hughes had a range. He could do different things, but I think that might be a point of connection for you to go and look back over specifically how he criticizes kind of the materialism or kind of, unfair treatment of classes of people in his poetry might
Mm-hmm.
be, and religion.
Yeah.
He's not for received ideas on religion at all.
Mm-hmm.
So you have some commonalities with his project in that front. I know it's a little bit, wait, Langston Hughes, but I think if you read him, you'll hear what I'm talking about. Also, his style is unlike Plath's style, that is a little hermetic, meaning hard to break into. That's not
Mm-hmm.
really your poetry. Well, Langston Hughes tends to present surfaces that you can immediately access, which is
That makes
something
sense.
I think your poetry wants to do that. Would you mind giving us a quick read of I Remember Religion?
Oh, sure. Um, I remember religion telling me souls were made of oxygen and cognitive dissonance encased in fungi, meat, and organ systems. No, that was science. Religion taught me we were apes in caves having so much sex we bred our brethren to existence. Wait, sorry. Again, that was science. Religion taught me that caves rose us from the dead. No, God rose someone from the dead some time ago. He brought oxygen to two apes. I mean, people. I mean, men. God once brought two men oxygen, then ensured. Oh, I can't see the bottom.
Oh, I can scroll for you if that's the issue.
Thank you. God once brought two men oxygen, then ensured that we can only grow as far as panels of fungi will allow. Religion, that is science. No, evolution taught me how to divvy up my organs, blood platelets, and tooth enamel into a brand new, original, great ape. I mean, person.
Kristen, you have to tell me you haven't attended some slams or open mics.
I have. The sad thing is that I can't retain anybody's attention. I mean, the ones I have been to, I think I just went on like a bad cultural night and I just didn't match the style of what
But
was going on around me.
surely you have a very inflected. So if I were to give this what I would call a kind of a neutral read for a workshop, right, I would
Mhm.
have to take away those performative aspects. So there's kind of different type of cultures, right? So in a performative context, in an open mic or in a slam, it's the expectation that the poet is going to perform. But a lot of readings, poets give these really dry, boring reads. A workshop might be somewhere in between, but if you're reading the poem aloud, I would probably give it more, I remember religion telling me souls were made of oxygen and cognitive dissonance. And I'm not saying like my approach is right and yours is wrong, but it's
Mhm.
clear to me that there's a dramatic element. So you're thinking consciously as you're writing about how you could perform this or how an audience would respond. And that's good, but I also want you to be able to focus how a reader would respond.
Yeah.
And when you got to that first no, I could hear that you're really inflecting this and giving it a lot of energy. While when I read it, it didn't do that on the page in the same way.
Okay. I've heard that before. And it's I get confused because as I'm reading the poem, I remember what I was feeling when I wrote it. And that's what comes out as I read it.
Totally.
So it's almost, yeah.
I call
So
this
I
flipping the switch, right? So when we write a new poem and compose a poem, we want we want to be in a radically open space to our emotions and to our inspiration. And then when we go to revise it, we want to flip this kind of like John Wick type of mode of like, I'm going to go and kill it. I'm going to fix
Mhm.
everything. And I'm relentless and merciless. And that's the kind of revision mentality. But you have to be able to turn that off again. Because if you
Mhm.
go and you go to write your next poem and John Wick is still around shooting stuff, you're not going to be able to do it, right? So
Mhm.
um,
I've had that problem before too. Yeah.
then that editor gets up in your head and you can't turn that stuff off when you need to.
Yeah,
But
for
I
sure.
think for what I want to look at with this poem, um, I feel like there's this speaker. And I heard the speaker very much. You have what would that be? Are you like raised in a borough of New York, like
Yeah.
Queens or Long
I'm
Island?
from Queens.
Que-
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you
My
didn't tell me
my.
that, right? There's nowhere. I can
Yeah.
just hear
Well,
it.
good job. Yeah. My parents. My mother was born and raised in
I
Queens.
heard the on, that your open O sound, that you get
Mhm.
that in Rhode Island a little bit, some parts of where I'm from, Massachusetts boy.
Okay.
So you
All
get
right. Yeah.
some of
That
that
like.
South Shore. You could get a little bit of that,
Yeah.
like Attleboro. But once you get into Rhode Island, it becomes a little bit more. But coffee.
Coffee.
Yeah, see, yours
Yeah.
is more pronounced. Yeah, I
Coffee.
went to Sarah Lawrence, which is in Yonkers, and you
Oh,
hear a
nice.
little bit of that, but it's
Mhm.
not quite. Yours is even
Probably
bigger.
more refined. Yeah.
Yonkers, no, Yonkers accent is not that refined. No, no. Any rate, we're wildly off topic, but yeah. So, uh, so you get this desire in the poem to use this tool which we'd call rhetoric, right? So rhetoric is the no's and the wait and the sorries and
Yeah.
this kind of refutation. So that's a rhetorical strategy. You see that famously in like a Shakespearean sonnet. He kind of changes and goes back and if this were, but, and although, and those types of
Yeah.
words are cues that we're having a kind of an argument or a discussion in a poem, right?
You're changing your mind in the middle of the poem,
Right. So this
almost.
is an
Yeah.
internal dialogue in this poem. Um, but I would think one thing you could consider with this poem would be to take some of those out, or to minimize them and to not make them on their own standalone stanzas, but to integrate
Mm-hmm.
them a little bit, and to see what happens with this poem if with fewer interruptions you're able to, because the most exciting thing about this poem is its ideas and its the shock of lines like fungi, meat, and organ systems,
Mm-hmm.
um, the encased in particular.
Mm-hmm.
That's, you're drawing the reader's eye at that point. So the reader is imagining this kind of grotesquerie now,
Mm-hmm.
and that's important. If you can
Yeah.
get them feeling stuff, then you're going to be able to start to. But I would hold their attention with that and be able
Mm-hmm.
to go directly from those organ systems into religion taught me we were apes. Now, as you sort through this poem, you might find is you have too much of a good thing. The caves having
Hmm.
so much sex, we bred our brethren to extinction. I actually think
Right.
that in caves having too much sex is good. Um, maybe bred our brethren to extinction. I mean, it's factually accurate. So I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
keep all that. Any
That's
rate, I
I
think
was.
the exciting part to this poem is when it becomes as specific and located as possible.
Yeah.
Um,
I worked very hard to like kind of marry the concept of poetic language with scientific accuracy. And so I worked really hard on word uh collections of words like encased in fungi, meat, and organ systems.
So if we look at the scientific tradition, right, and we think, well, what would be kind of how does poetry kind of dovetail in a nice way with this? And what you could find is you could find scientists are very precise in their description. So if they're describing a new species or a discovery of something, it's going to be extremely accurate. It's going to be
Right.
like a lepidopterist. They put that pin through the butterfly. They pin it. That's what we want to do with language. We want to make it as
Right.
narrow and as specific as possible. So in a nod, if your inspiration is scientific language, you want to take out stuff that is extraneous. So in caves having so much sex, we bred our brethren to extinction. I don't know. I mean, the so much then is perhaps loses some of that. You know, I like the image and I like the idea. I don't know.
Is it just too much in one piece? Like maybe it's just too many ideas coming
The
together?
poem presents a lot of different ways in which the kind of a satirical stance that the speaker is trying to say, if I were basically to fantasize about the creation of a religion, I wouldn't be able to do so. I would keep returning to these other conceits over and over again. And you present these conceits that sound absurd, but are in fact in some way based on some evolutionary, thing.
Yeah.
And by the end, I think it's supposed to exclude any, like, how is it possible that all of us collectively as a species instead came up with God and deities? I think, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't want to tell you what your poem's supposed to mean. And the absurdity of that conclusion. I think it's supposed to show us absurdity. In the same way, instead of showing us, well, how absurd is this biblical story? It's going to say, let's presuppose I were just fantasizing and inventing a religion.
Right.
But short, tight, and then as much scientific language as you can. So anatomical language, a language about specific attributes of apes, of their fur, or of their spine, or of their opposable thumb, whatever. You know
Look
what I'm
at our
saying?
hands.
Totally. Nail as much detail as you can. And I always say teach and delight, which is a poet, Sir Philip Sidney, said that. Teach and delight. He wrote that a long time ago when English was still somewhat mutable, but I think that your goal is the same. You want to teach people a little bit about science. So you're going to have to evince a little bit, you're going to have to muscle up a little bit on your expertise to convince.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Let's move on.
I like that idea. Thank you.
Let's give me if you can. If you can, I love the dramatic reading, but maybe we could go for a shade more neutral on Pat.
Gotcha.
But still, you can give me as much queens as you like. That's fine.
Okay. I'll keep the queens. Yeah. Awesome. Right. Remembering pregnancy, is that the one?
Let's go to Pat, please.
Pat. Okay. All right. Pat. The Bible mentions roughly 600 women. About 200 have names, with 27 sharing the same names. So when I get mine, I'll finally marry 1,200 husbands, 1.2 thousand forms of individualized ID, names to match with my outfits. So, what sort of tests do women take to be seen in the eyes of God? Should we try to be in his eyes? Or should he be able to hear us all still sharing the same names? Darling, sweetheart, honey, cutie pie, little girl, baby doll.
Do you feel how strong that litany is at the end? That this is the heart and soul of this poem, is this litany?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Because
yes. I pulled together some of the most common things I've had shouted at me from down the street and at work and at school and on my way to everywhere if I'm not driving in my car. But then they honk at me when I'm driving in my car. So yeah, that was a very passionate part for me personally. It was pulling a lot. And I specifically wanted the names to digress in respect the further you go down, because that's how it feels.
so again, we're going to flip that switch and we're going to go from the coincidence of inspiration and of the authority of witness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, that's true. Your experiences and your witness is important to your credibility as a poet and important to the statement and the change you want to affect, right? But we're going to flip that switch and we're going to say, why would I say, maybe we keep this litany at the end,
Okay.
but I think it takes a long time for us to get there.
Okay. All right.
I would
That's fair.
think if we could get there quicker, it might be good. And if you could show us a contrast between some of these women who are mentioned by name, but perhaps, have absurd sounding biblical names or something like that, or aren't, wife of, daughter of, slave of. If you can give us,
I was literally going to say that.
if you were going to give us the context of when, and give us the language, again, this is going to be your authority. So if you're going to say the Bible mentions roughly 600 women, what you have done is you've provided a survey. But poetry doesn't work in survey. Poetry works in specifics.
Okay.
Just as in the previous poem, the more scientific specifics you can give us about the apes, about the people, about their origins, about what what it was like in the caves, what it was cold and damp, or were they lighting fires? Were they chewing on something? Why do I get cavities? Whatever it is,
Yeah.
the more detail you can get to make me, the reader, feel, the better. Similarly here, widely considered the worst poem ever written is a poem about a disaster where a bridge collapsed or something. A lot of people died. And it's in this book called, what's it called? It's a collection of bad poetry. It's called The Owl Bear, I think.
I think I've heard of it.
And it's the most famously bad poem. And if you read the poem, you'll understand why, which is it's statistical.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that is the most boring part of news, is the statistics.
Well, not for everybody. Different techniques, different mediums persuade in different ways. If we have a poster with a very simple line graph and statistic below it, 9 out of 10 of this, like convince, sold, like, you'll get testicular cancer if you do that. Like, that's pretty convincing to me. Like, I don't want that. You know what I'm saying? Like, that could be really,
yeah.
Well,
I guess
you understand. You're in the field, so you understand what I'm saying. But poetry doesn't convince using the same techniques as other forms of persuasion.
Right.
It has to appeal to the senses. That's how it functions. Particularly, we want to get smells, touches. We want to get visceral sensation. We want to get sensation that taps into our own memories if we can get readers to relive their own experiences and memories, success. Opening this way, the Bible mentions roughly, and the roughly then, it's not the case that it undercuts your authority necessarily, but it's always already couching your poem is not going to be able to deliver this kind of satisfying red meat kind of like,
punch.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Nail
I
it.
see what you're saying.
Then you go on
it's
with
very
more,
passive.
another qualification, about
Yeah.
200.
Yeah.
And then sharing the same names. And then so very kind of tentative opening compared with the confidence that you end with. Then you have this litany of numbers, 1,200 husbands, 1.2 thousand forms of it. So this litany here compared to the litany you at the end.
That was where I was really struggling, was that point of the poem, because I didn't know if I should go deeper into that. Like, what would I do with 1,200 husbands? I'd be running around telling people to pick up after themselves all day. But or if I should just do away with that completely.
So part of your imagination, Kristen, is you have these kind of sudden fantasy moments where you go on suddenly different directions in your poems. And that creates discontinuity. A little bit is exciting for a reader, right? A lot of it could be too much. I don't think my primary concern is not that there's too many kind of non sequiturs in your poetry. That is not my primary concern. My primary concern is that you get the reader emotionally vested.
Gotcha.
Why not? Why not amplify your own authority in this poem? How could you amplify your own authority maximally? I am not. I am not a nameless woman in the Bible. I am not the woman, the slave who is slave of blah, blah, blah. I'm not this and that. When you drive by, you have called me, or down the street, you have said, and then, I don't know. Hey,
something like that. Yeah.
I also have to be careful. I have to be cautious, because I can write from my own experiences and I can come up with strategies and tactics to maximize and do justice to the themes that I want to talk about in my poetry. But sometimes new themes and new topics need new angles, right? So sometimes my approaches won't work. So if I'm like, well, if I were a woman and I were writing this poem, it gets a little bit like, really, dude? Really?
Yeah.
Really? Huh? Because that's kind of fucked up. So there are limits, right? I can tell you, for me, based on my experiences, I would like this poem to come out and just, hit as hard as you can, as early as you can. A poem is never, ever a mistake.
Okay.
And then if you want to learn the kind of 1-2, or you want to learn like the dodge first and then come back and hit them, but it's never a bad thing to lead off heavy in a poem, because poems are short.
Right.
And reader attention is pretty shitty. They'll just bail. Okay.
I do the same thing though. I'm in a hurry. Sometimes I just read the short ones.
Well, not just that. I mean,
I understand, or just engaging.
Yeah,
it has to be engaging. And if it's not so like I could take the end of this and put it further up. I guess I was worried about not having a punchy ending.
So I admire desire to end a poem strong. And sometimes ending a poem can be extremely difficult to find a good way to kind of stick that landing. But I got to tell you, if you don't open a poem strong, you won't have an opportunity to end it.
Yeah,
you know. Okay. So let's go on to the final Kristen Nieto poem, which is
Mhm.
Remembering Pregnancy. Well, not the final poem you give me, but final we'll talk tonight. So please give
Yeah,
us a read of this.
sure. Remembering pregnancy. My birth control, the one I love, that IUD, retracts its tail and crawls deeper inside of me every time somebody says, "You should have another. Have another. Have another."
Is there anything that we talked about that this poem doesn't do? It does pretty much everything I said every other poem needs to do to be successful. Voila.
Mm-hmm.
It does it.
Yeah. This one was on the
What's
fly too.
what's the problem? It comes out immediately with a bold way to grab the reader. You hit them pretty hard right off the bat. My birth control. So that that pronoun there says this is my witness,
Mhm.
my authority, my poem. Okay? That's
Uh-huh.
bold. So you've captured them right there. The reader isn't going anywhere. They're with you now. They're your reader, my birth control. You follow it up with another interesting statement on line 2, the one I love. Now, any reader worth their salt is going to be, what? But don't you love the beloved? Don't
No,
you
I love
love
my
the
IUD. Yeah.
Okay, but you didn't let that giggling get into the poem. You stayed disciplined, right?
Yes.
You give a little bit of a stanza break, and then what do?
I describe what it does.
Yeah. I've never inserted an IUD, but after this poem, I kind of feel like I have.
Nice.
You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? That's what you want to achieve in poetry. You convince with specific sensation,
Hmm.
right? The
Mm-hmm.
retracting its tail is so visceral. First, I was like, was that like a shrimp or something? But I felt something happening. I felt like, I don't know, like one of those uh, alien movies, you know?
Yeah.
I
Yes.
was feeling it, man. And then you follow it up again, crawls deeper inside me. Now, here's the volta, here's the flip. Okay? This is the volta is an asana is when we switch perspectives, which this poem is going to enact a switch. And a switch is a very nice thing to do a reader because it fucks them up. And we wanna break some hearts or at least, some kneecaps, right? And this
Right.
poem's gonna do that. How does it do that? Because the crawling, this thing that's going deeper and deeper into you, is from something outside. So the inside and the outside in this poem are kind of in this kind of balance, or maybe not balance, but there's an action and reaction in this
Hmm.
poem.
Yeah.
It's coiled, it's tight, it's effective. Every time someone says, now the someone comes, it's late in the poem for the someone. It's late because the one you love was on line 2. But that's effective because the one you love isn't a person,
Hmm.
right? Now, the only minor issue that I would have, which is one of kind of high style kind of thing. So this is like sending it to the New Yorker style. You know, come on, get
Yeah.
out of Queens. We're going to uptown Manhattan. Okay, you can't wear your hair like that. We're going to the Upper East Side and we're going to have brunch and they're going to have all those forks. So that's what I'm saying. The uptown style, you wouldn't reiterate this refrain 3 times in a row. What would you do in the uptown style for the New Yorker?
Uh, just you should have another.
That's it. Bang! Done. As soon as the bomb goes off, you leave. You're done. You don't hang around because you're rich and you have people to clean up after your mess. Come on. You know?
You're right.
You see what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah, on the other side of the bridge too long.
Well, okay. So there's a lot of different ways to go. I'm not saying that there's better or worse, but I'm saying in terms of like the classic tradition of kind of the kind of understatement and free verse, because this poem is so economical, it accomplishes so much with so little. I would hate for you to send this out. Maybe not to the New Yorker, you know, they receive too many to care. However, were you to send this to a high quality online literary review with serious, skilled, veteran editors who are looking for people trying to break through, I would hate for them to turn it away because of the triple refrain at the end.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I would much prefer this poem to be in print or online so you can brag about it. And I think your best chances of doing that would be hit him and quit.
Okay.
Now,
all right. So.
I know I've been on the other side of this, and people told me, hey, if you take a little bit out, you do this, you do that, nip and tuck. I'm like, nip this. Come on. My poem, I'm going to do what I want. So think about it. Think about it.
Right. I know. I like the suggestions. They make a lot of sense. And as long as I can still get that the same emotion that I intended with the triple line with just the one line, if it's effective, then yeah.
Well, so that ultimately the goal for your kind of next phase in your development, for going from where you are now to where you want to go, is that flipping that switch should allow you to say, I'm going to trust that my poems can create the reactions I design for the reader. And I'm going to take my emotion and take it out of the poem at this point and empower the reader to have their own experience with my work.
Yeah. That is ultimately my goal. I do want readers to get what they need out of my work. I don't necessarily want them to take what I'm inflecting upon them, if that makes any sense. Like when I present on Reddit, I don't explain the story behind my poetry.
Exactly.
I just expect it to speak for itself.
Yeah. So the other way to think about it is you want, in especially a poem like this, but in all of your poems, I think your style should be a kind of an aerodynamic style that's piercing, because you have a point that you're trying to make. And I don't think you should apologize or disguise the fact that your poems have a particular perspective and that witness that I'm talking about, which is going to be critical to your persona. It's not about you, or it's not about Kristen. It's about a persona you're constructing. Who's the poet, right?
Yeah.
Anything else you want to ask me?
No, that was all very insightful. I've just been playing with what I want to say, and it sounds like in my poetry, I just need to have more confidence and believe in what I'm trying to teach people. Really, what I'm trying to.
That confidence is so critical when you're writing the draft. When you're revising the draft,
I feel like that's where it dwindles, because when I write it, I'm confident and I'm getting this out, and then when I read it again, I'm like, oh, that's not very good. And so then I edit, and sometimes I edit too much. And I think that kind of happened with Pet. I started over editing certain aspects, and it just became something that it wasn't when I originally started.
So I personally, I am one of these people kind of embrace the anxiety embrace the neuroticism, embrace the kind of the doubt. So people are like, well, I can move beyond doubt. And like, I'm going to be so confident that I'm just going to stick with whatever I wrote first, because like, that's going to work out best. I don't think that's the most productive stance. I would like you to be extremely confident to take risks in your revision. And if you go too far, you should be proud of yourself. You should say, that's good. That's good. It is good, because the surest way for you to stay exactly where you are now and not make progress is to become overly contented with your production now. You can always write another poem. People are like, well, I don't want to break this poem. It's like, but you probably are gonna break a few poems on your way to create your great poem, right? That's okay.
Yeah, the way I see it is, I wrote that line once, I could write it again, or I could write something like it again. It's kind of like a file, you just save it for later, and if it works best in another piece, then that's where
sometimes you'll go back to a handful of pieces you wrote a couple of years ago, and you'll say, I could merge some of these together, or I could take some of these best lines and mix them up and see what happens. But I think that being alert to kind of, when you're looking at a draft, kind of being able, like more like a sculpturist who can see in that kind of unfinished product where the true poem is, and take away the unnecessary parts to let it really come through. And I know what you're saying about remembering pregnancy. You're saying to me, well, Max, I wrote this poem more or less intact this way. It just came out that way, right?
Yeah, this one I didn't really edit very much.
But that's only possible when you've put in the work and the pain and the suffering in those other drafts. Then you could get a reward of a poem that's easy every once in a while.
Yeah, those are nice.
No, that's nice. when I was in grad school, Dan Tobin said, revise 5 poems to write the next one.
That's good advice. That rings very true.
So we'll leave it with Dan Tobin having the last word.
Of course.
I know. So why don't you tool around with some stuff, Kristen, and see what you come up with. Particularly on Pet, I think there's the greatest opportunity there for upside of the poems. All of them are going to tune up well. But I think Pet gives you an opportunity to show your tenacity to the people and what you're capable of doing in revision, and give it a shot. Try a few different things and see what happens. And I have confidence in you. You'll do great.
Thank you. I appreciate the time, and I like your advice. It's very insightful. It's given me a lot to think about.
All right, let's do this.
And a lot to play with. Hell
All
yeah.
right. Thanks again.
Hell yeah. Thank you.